The wine caught the light wrong. Green, where it should have been red. Bernice Tan noticed. Her husband, the Korean Mafia boss sitting 18 inches away at their family dinner, didn't. She watched his hand move toward the glass. 3 seconds. That's all she had. 3 seconds to decide whether to save him or finally let go. She reached across the table, lifted the glass, and drank. But here's what nobody knew in that moment. Not her husband, not his mother watching from across the table, not even the brother who'd poisoned that wine. Bernice didn't just drink it to save him. Part of her drank it to escape. 6 years of being invisible. Does that to a woman who's forgotten she's allowed to matter. This is Bernice, 30 years old, mother of 4-year-old twins. For 6 years, she's held everything together, managed the household, raised the children mostly alone, kept the peace between her husband and his traditional Korean mother. She's good at it. So good that everyone stopped noticing she was doing it. Her husband, Woo Sung, runs a crime empire. Important work, dangerous work, work that requires his complete focus. So Bernice became background, competent, useful, essential, and completely unseen. Tonight, at this family dinner, that invisibility is about to cost her everything. In the heart of Atlanta's wealthy Korean-American crime families, there are rules even bosses must follow. Rules about loyalty, about succession, about protecting what's yours. But there's one rule nobody talks about, the one that matters most. Never ignore the woman holding your empire together. On this particular Thursday evening in March, that rule was about to be broken in the most devastating way possible. The private dining room at Meridian Steakhouse, mahogany table, white linen, crystal stemware, catching the amber glow of the chandelier overhead. Left side of the table, Bernice, 30 years old. Expensive pale cream silk gown purchased by Woo Sung's assistant, not him. Hands folded in her lap, perfect posture. The portrait of compliance. Center, Tan Woo Sung. The Korean Mafia boss everyone called untouchable. Black Tom Ford suit. Phone out, scrolling through logistics spreadsheets while having a conversation. Not unusual. He'd answered emails during Minjin's last parent-teacher conference too. Right side, Seo Yoon, the younger brother, navy suit, sweating despite the air conditioning that kept the room at exactly 68 degrees. And their mother, Bo Yoon, 70 years old, burgundy Chanel suit, silver hair pulled back, watching everything with the stillness of a woman who'd survived 5 decades in this world, by noticing what others dismissed. This is how power arranges itself. This is the geometry of a family dinner that looks perfect from the outside. From the inside, it was already fracturing. For 6 years, Bernice had been the family's shock absorber, softening Bo Yoon's traditional edges when she criticized Woo Sung's westernized business decisions, translating Woo Sung's cold pragmatism into warmth for the twins when he forgot to show up for soccer games, holding space no one remembered to thank her for creating. She was good at reading rooms. Had to be. Tonight, she was reading everything. The accountant, Mr. Kim, sitting 2 seats down, kept glancing at Seo Yoon. Quick, nervous, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. Seo Yoon's fingers drummed the table. Once, twice, 3 times, stopped. Bernice knew that tell. Her 4-year-old son Young-jin did the same thing when he'd broken something and was waiting to see if anyone noticed. The rhythm of guilt. The sommelier arrived with the wine Woo Sung had ordered without looking up. The bow was too deep, the apology too smooth. My apologies for the delay, Mr. Tan. Half a second too late, too rehearsed, like he'd practiced it. Bernice's pulse quickened. Not panic, pattern recognition. Something was wrong. The 2015 Bordeaux. Expensive. The kind of wine you order to impress the senior advisors. Woo Sung had invited to discuss the shipping contract closing next week. Opened with ceremony. Cork presented. Wine poured with precision into the Riedel glass, the ones Bernice had picked out 3 years ago when they'd renovated this private dining space. Placed in front of Woo Sung. He didn't look at it. He was explaining container routing to Seo Yoon. Numbers, logistics. The language he spoke fluently. The language he'd never taught Bernice because, as he'd said twice in the last month, you don't understand the business. But Bernice understood numbers. She understood desperation. She understood the way Seo Yoon was watching that wine glass now. Not like a brother watching his sibling drink. Like a man watching a timer count down. waiting for detonation. And she understood what she was seeing in the glass itself. The viscosity was off, just slightly, the way it settled when the sommelier set it down. Too thick, too slow. The light from the chandelier hit it wrong. Green, faint, beneath the deep red. Bordeaux doesn't shimmer. This did. Bernice's mind calculated faster than her heart could catch up. Poison. In Wusung's glass. At a family dinner. Which meant someone at this table, someone close enough to compromise the wine supplier, had decided tonight was the night Tan Wusung died. 3 seconds. That's how long she had before his hand reached the glass. 3 seconds to decide. Option 1. Speak. Warn him. Watch him dismiss her, the way he dismissed everything she said that didn't fit his immediate agenda. You're being paranoid, Bernice. And if she was wrong, if she caused a scene over wine that was fine, she'd be the hysterical wife who didn't understand how these dinners worked. Option 2. Say nothing. Let him drink. Watch him die. Raise Min-jin and Young-jin alone. Become the widow everyone pitied, but no one actually saw. Option 3. The one that made no logical sense. The one that felt like inevitability. I want to try your selection. Her voice was barely above a murmur. The kind of tone she used when asking Wusung if he'd remembered to call his mother. Soft, undemanding, easy to ignore. He didn't pause his conversation with Seo-yoon. Didn't look at her. Just kept talking about container manifests and customs clearance. Bernice reached across the 18 inches that separated them. Her fingers closed around the stem of the wine glass. She lifted it. The liquid caught the light, green shimmer beneath red. She brought it to her lips. Metallic, chemical, wrong. She drank anyway. The burn started in her throat. Not the warm bloom of good wine. Fire, spreading fast. Her chest tightened, heart stuttering like it had forgotten its rhythm. Her hand flew to her heart. Not dramatic, reflexive. The way you grab for something solid when the ground shifts beneath you. The napkin slipped from her other hand. White linen. Purple-black stain, spreading across it like watercolor. Almost artistic under the chandelier's glow. 18 inches away, Wusung was still talking, and if the shipment clears by Tuesday, we're ahead of schedule. He hadn't noticed. Bo-yoon had. Her eyes snapped to Bernice, then to the napkin, then to Seo-yoon, whose face had drained of all color. But Wusung? Still talking about shipping schedules. He hadn't noticed his wife was dying. If you want to understand what Bernice just gambled, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and whether you think Bernice made the right choice. Because in 60 seconds, everything she thought she knew about her marriage is about to shatter. Bernice's vision tunneled. The chandelier above, fractured into kaleidoscope shards, gold light splitting into 1,000 pieces that didn't fit together anymore. Sound distorted. Wusung's voice, still talking about container manifests and customs clearance, became underwater garble. Muffled, distant, like listening to someone speak from the other side of a pool. Her heart stuttered against her ribs, not the steady rhythm it had kept for 30 years. This was different, irregular, like it was trying to remember how to beat and failing. The metallic taste spread. Copper, chemical, wrong. Bo-yoon saw it first. The matriarch's eyes snapped from Bernice to the napkin, with its purple-black stain, then to Seo-yoon, whose face had drained of all color. She didn't gasp, didn't shout, didn't reach for Bernice. Instead, she set down her wine glass with deliberate care, the kind of control that comes from 5 decades of surviving rooms where panic gets you killed. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, precise. Seo-yoon, call Dr. Lim, now. Tell him aconite poisoning. The brother froze. His mouth opened. No sound came out. Because Bo-yoon hadn't asked what happened. She'd diagnosed it, and she'd used his name first. Not as a command, as an accusation. Mother, I don't... She cut him off. The glass was meant for your brother. She drank it for him. Call the doctor. Each word landed like a gavel. Seo-yoon's hands shook as he pulled out his iPhone. The screen lit up, his face pale, sweating, guilty. He dialed. Wusung was still talking. So if the shipment clears by Tuesday... It was the absence of sound that finally cut through. The silence where Bernice's soft breathing usually was. The space she'd always filled without him noticing. He turned. She was slumped against the chair, one hand still pressed to her chest, the other limp on the table beside the stained napkin. Her lips had a faint purple tinge. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something he couldn't see. Bernice. Nothing. Bernice. Louder this time. Urgent. She didn't respond. And for the first time in 6 years, since the night his father was assassinated, and he'd taken over the organization at 28, Tan Wusung felt genuine fear. The room moved. Senior advisors stood. Chairs scraped against hardwood. Mr. Kim, the accountant, reached for his phone. Bo-yoon raised one hand. Stop. No one leaves. No one calls anyone except Dr. Lim. This family handles its own emergencies. Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The kind you don't question. Not if you want to stay in this room. Not if you want to stay alive. She looked at her son. Woo-sung. Get her on the floor. Elevate her legs. Keep her conscious. He'd lifted bodies before. Disposed of threats in the back rooms of warehouses. Negotiated under gunpoint in shipping containers. Watched men die and felt nothing. Because feeling meant weakness. But when he lifted Bernice, his wife, the mother of Min-jin and Young-jin, the woman he hadn't truly looked at in months, his hands shook. She was lighter than he remembered. 30 years old, and she felt fragile in his arms. Breakable. Or maybe he'd just forgotten what it felt like to hold her. He lowered her to the floor. Hardwood. Cold. He grabbed a folded napkin from the table, placed it under her head. Bernice, stay with me. Look at me. Her eyes drifted, unfocused. He pressed 2 fingers to her wrist. Pulse. Faint. Irregular. His other hand went to her neck. Carotid artery. Thready. He'd learned this in the Marines. Before the Empire. Before the marriage. Before he'd become the kind of man who forgot to notice his wife was in the room. Bernice, can you hear me? Nothing. Through the metallic burn and the way her heart kept forgetting to beat, Bernice felt his arms around her. Heard him saying her name. Not the distracted, Bernice, can you handle this? She'd heard for 6 years. This was different, urgent, afraid. And beneath the pain, beneath the fear that she might actually die, that Min-jin and Young-jin might grow up without a mother, there was something else. Something she was ashamed to acknowledge, even as poison shut down her organs. Relief. She finally mattered. Even if mattering meant dying. 12 minutes. That's how long it took Dr. Lim to arrive. 12 minutes of Woo-sung holding Bernice on the floor of Meridian's private dining room. 12 minutes of Bo-yoon interrogating So-yoon with surgical precision, while the senior advisors stood frozen against the wall. 12 minutes of Bernice's pulse growing fainter under his fingertips. Dr. Lim came through the door, with a black medical bag that looked like something from a different era. Old school. The kind of doctor who still made house calls for families who couldn't go to hospitals. Families with secrets. He knelt beside Bernice, checked her pupils, her pulse, listened to her heart with a stethoscope he pulled from the bag. Aconite? Bo-yoon's voice. Calm. Certain. Yes. Dr. Lim moved fast. IV inserted into Bernice's arm. Activated charcoal. Sodium bicarbonate. Fluids. His hands were steady, practiced. Woo-sung watched. Useless. The man who controlled shipping routes from Vancouver to Singapore couldn't do anything but hold his wife's hand and wait. 5 minutes passed. Dr. Lim sat back, checked her vitals again. He looked up. She'll survive. Woo-sung exhaled, didn't realize he'd been holding his breath. She only consumed about 30 milliliters, 2 small sips. The full glass would have killed an adult male in under 20 minutes. Dr. Lim looked at Woo-sung directly. Mr. Tan, that wine was meant for you. The ambulance ride to the family's private medical facility took 18 minutes. Woo-sung sat beside the gurney, holding Bernice's hand for the first time in 3 years. Since the twins were born, she'd been in the hospital, and he'd promised to be there more, promised to make time. Promises he'd forgotten, the moment the next territory negotiation came up. Her pulse was steadying now. The charcoal working. Her breathing evening out. She was going to live. But as Woo-sung watched her unconscious face, her features softened without the careful mask she always wore around him, a terrible question took root. If she saw the poison, if she knew it would kill, why didn't she just warn him? Why did she drink it herself? Like she'd been waiting for this moment, not to save him, but to escape. 1 week later, Bernice was awake. Private suite at Gwangmyeong Medical Center. The facility the Tan family had used for discreet medical matters for 2 decades. Oak furniture, cream walls, windows that overlooked a garden, designed to look peaceful from the inside, while guards patrolled the perimeter outside. Bernice sat propped against pillows, mechanically eating the bone broth. Bo-yoon had brought in a thermos that morning, traditional Korean recipe. Beef bones simmered for hours with ginger and garlic, the kind of thing that was supposed to restore strength. Her color was returning, pale cream instead of gray. Her vitals were stable. Dr. Lim had checked them that morning and nodded his approval. But something fundamental had changed, in the way she held her body. Like a string that had been pulled too tight for 6 years had finally snapped. She moved carefully now, deliberately, like she was learning how to inhabit her own skin again. The door opened. Woo-sung entered carrying white orchids, her favorite flowers, though he'd had to text his assistant at 9 last night to confirm. The assistant had responded within 2 minutes. She kept files on these things. He also brought a small Tiffany box, blue, iconic, the kind of box that's supposed to make everything better. Bernice. She looked up, set down the spoon, folded her hands in her lap. How are you feeling? Better. Dr. Lim says I can go home in a few days. Her voice was steady, polite, the tone she used when coordinating schedules with the twins' teachers. Woo-sung sat in the chair beside her bed. The orchids went on the windowsill. The Tiffany box stayed in his hands. He'd rehearsed this. In the car, in the elevator, standing outside her door for 3 minutes before entering. I should have listened. Bernice didn't respond, just watched him with eyes that were present, but distant. You tried to warn me about So-yoon, about the financial discrepancies. You tried to tell me something was wrong. He paused. I dismissed you. I told you that you didn't understand the business. I'm sorry. He opened the Tiffany box. Diamond bracelet. Delicate. The kind of thing she never wore because she had nowhere to wear it. No galas. No events. Just school pickups, grocery runs, and family dinners where no one looked at her anyway. I should have trusted your instincts. You have good judgment. I won't make that mistake again. Bernice looked at the bracelet, then at the orchids, then at him. Thank you. She took the box, admired the bracelet, with the kind of attention you give to things that don't actually matter. Set it on the bedside table beside the water pitcher and the call button she hadn't pressed once in 7 days. It's beautiful. I know you like white orchids. I should have brought them sooner. You've been busy, I understand. The shipping deal closed successfully? Yes. Everything's secure. Good. I'm glad. The conversation had the rhythm of 2 people discussing weather. Predictable, safe, emotionally empty. Woo-sung noticed. He just didn't understand what it meant yet. From the doorway, Bo-yoon watched. She'd arrived 5 minutes before her son, intentionally, positioned herself where she could observe without participating. The matriarch had survived 5 decades in this world by reading what people didn't say out loud. She saw her son bringing gifts and apologies. She saw her daughter-in-law accepting them with mechanical politeness. She saw the disconnect. He thought he was fixing a professional oversight, failing to trust her business analysis. Bernice knew he was apologizing for the wrong betrayal entirely. Bo-yoon said nothing, just watched, calculated, waited. 20 minutes later, the twins arrived. Minjin and Yongjin burst through the door, with the unfiltered energy of 4-year-olds who'd been told to be gentle with mommy and had no idea what that actually meant. They climbed onto the bed carefully, like she was made of glass, and might shatter if they moved too fast. Mommy! Minjin's small hands patted Bernice's face. You're awake. Hi, baby. Why did you get sick? Minjin's voice was confused, worried. Daddy said you had to stay at the hospital, but you don't look sick. And Bernice, who had held everything together for 6 years, who had absorbed every criticism from Bo-yoon, every dismissal from Woo-sung, every lonely night when the twins asked where Daddy was, started crying. Not dramatic sobs, not the kind of breakdown you see in movies. Just silent tears she couldn't control, streaming down her face while her children watched, confused. Mommy? Why are you sad? Minjin patted her face with tiny hands, trying to wipe away tears that kept coming. Yongjin pressed his stuffed dinosaur into her arms. T-Rex makes me feel better. You can hold him. Woo-sung stood there. Useless. He'd negotiated $1 million deals without flinching. Ordered security details with precision. But he had no idea how to comfort his own wife. Boyun gently took the twins' hands. Let's let Mommy rest. We'll come back tomorrow. But Mommy's crying. I know, Minjin. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're tired. Mommy will be okay. She led them out, closed the door with a soft click that felt louder than it should have, leaving Woo-sung alone with his wife, and a question he couldn't answer. Why had holding their children made her cry harder? After a long silence, Bernice wiped her face, composed herself with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to cry quietly in laundry rooms and locked bathrooms. When was the last time you asked me how I was doing? Woo-sung blinked. What? Not my schedule. Not if the house is running smoothly. Not if the twins are hitting milestones. Her voice was flat. Matter of fact. Me. When did you last ask about me? He opened his mouth, closed it, mentally scrolled through conversations, weeks of text messages, logistics, status updates, calendar coordination. He genuinely couldn't remember. The silence stretched, heavy. Bernice nodded, like he'd just confirmed something she already knew. I warned you about the money because I pay attention. I drank the poison because I saw what you didn't. She looked at him directly. No anger. Just exhausted truth. But you want to know something? I had to nearly die for you to finally look at me. And even now, you're apologizing for not listening to my business analysis. She gestured to the orchids, the bracelet, the careful apology he'd rehearsed. You're not apologizing for the fact that I've been invisible to you for 6 years. Woo-sung left the hospital that night, believing he understood. He'd failed to value her contributions, taken her competence for granted, treated her like staff, instead of a partner. All true, all worthy of apology. But Boyun, watching him drive away in his black Mercedes, knew something he didn't. Bernice hadn't told him the real reason she drank that poison, hadn't confessed that part of her wanted to escape. And until he knew that truth, every apology he made was just expensive noise. Drop a comment if you've experienced that specific kind of loneliness, having a companion, but completely feels alone. Because what Bernice is about to reveal will change everything Woo-sung thinks he knows about his wife's heroism. 2 weeks post-poisoning, Bernice came home. Physically recovered. The doctors had cleared her. No lasting damage to her heart or kidneys. The aconite had flushed through her system. She was, medically speaking, fine. Emotionally, she checked out entirely. She went through the motions. Made breakfast the twins wouldn't eat. Min-jin wanted cereal. Young-jin wanted toast. Neither wanted the eggs she'd scrambled. She coordinated schedules in the Notes app on her iPhone, responded to messages from concerned allies' wives, with the kind of polite gratitude that said, "Nothing real. Thank you so much for the flowers. I'm recovering well. Yes, we're all so grateful it wasn't worse. The children are handling it beautifully." Lies. All of it. Performed with the efficiency of someone who'd been performing for 6 years and saw no reason to stop now. Everyone saw a woman recovering from trauma. Boyun saw a woman who'd stopped trying. Sunday afternoon. 3 weeks after the poisoning. The twins were at the park with their nanny. Boyun had suggested it that morning, casually, like it was just a nice day for fresh air. Woo-sung was at a territory meeting, also Boyun's doing. She'd scheduled it to run long, made sure the agenda was packed with details that required his attention. The house was quiet when she arrived. She didn't knock, used her key, found Bernice in the living room folding laundry, with the mechanical precision of someone who needed her hands busy, so her mind wouldn't wander. Boyun set down her purse, vintage Chanel, the kind she'd owned since the 80s, and placed a thermos of tea on the coffee table. "We're going to talk." Bernice looked up. Didn't argue. Just set down the tiny t-shirt she'd been folding and nodded. "Not about what everyone thinks happened," Boyun continued. "About what actually happened." Bernice's hands stilled. Boyun sat across from her, not beside her on the couch, where it might feel comforting. Across, where she could see Bernice's face clearly. "You've been lying." Not accusatory, observational, the way you'd point out that someone had missed a button on their shirt. To the advisors, to Woo-sung, to yourself. Boyun poured tea into 2 cups. "Jasmine." The scent filled the room. "Everyone is calling you heroic. You're accepting the label like it's a coat that doesn't fit. Why?" Bernice reached for the practiced response, the one she'd given a dozen times in the last 3 weeks. "I did what anyone would. No. Boyun's voice cut clean, sharp, final. You did what someone who was desperate would do. There's a difference. And I need to know which kind of desperate you were. Silence. Bernice picked up her tea, set it down without drinking. Her hands were shaking. For 2 weeks, she'd held everything together, accepted flowers from Woo-sung's business associates, gratitude from the senior advisors, praise from family members who called her brave, selfless, devoted. She'd smiled at her children, tolerated her husband's apologies and expensive gifts, nodded through Dr. Lim's follow-up appointments. But alone with Bo-yoon, the one person who saw through every performance, she couldn't maintain the facade. Her hands shook harder. She set down the teacup carefully, like even that small action required all her concentration. When she spoke, it was barely above a whisper. I didn't just drink it to save him. Bo-yoon didn't move, didn't react, just waited. Part of me wanted to escape. The words came slowly, painfully, like pulling shrapnel from a wound. I've been so tired for so long. And in that moment when I saw the poison, I thought at least if I die saving him, I'll finally matter. At least I'll be remembered as someone who loved him, instead of someone who just managed his calendar and reminded him about his mother's birthday. She looked up, met Bo-yoon's eyes. I have 2 beautiful children. I love them more than anything. Her voice cracked, and part of me wanted to leave them. Not because they're not enough. Because I was so exhausted from being invisible that death felt like relief. The only way out I could see that wouldn't make me a monster for abandoning them. The tears came then, silent at first, then harder. Do you understand what I'm saying? I used my husband's murder attempt as an excuse to kill myself. I turned So-yoon's poison into my own escape plan. She pressed her hands to her face. What kind of person does that? What kind of mother thinks that way? Bo-yoon didn't comfort with platitudes, didn't reach across and squeeze her hand, or tell her it was okay. She just spoke truth. A person who has been slowly erased for 6 years. A mother who has been raising children in emotional solitary confinement. A woman who was taught that her value is measured entirely by how much she can endure without complaint. She paused. You're not terrible, Bernice. You're human, and you've been alone far too long. Bernice broke then, really broke, crying the way she hadn't allowed herself to in years. Ugly, shaking, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and uncontrolled. Not the silent tears. She'd learned to cry in locked bathrooms, while the twins watched PBS Kids in the next room. Bo-yoon didn't try to fix it, didn't tell her to calm down or that everything would be okay. She just sat with her, one hand on Bernice's shoulder, letting her collapse without rushing her through it. For the first time since the poisoning, Bernice wasn't being praised, or pitied, or apologized to. She was just being seen. When the crying finally slowed, Bo-yoon poured fresh tea, handed Bernice the cup, waited until she'd taken a sip before speaking again. My son thinks he failed to listen to your warnings. He's apologizing for taking your competence for granted. He's bringing you diamonds from Tiffany and saying he'll value your input more in business decisions. She paused. He has no idea that he drove you to want to disappear. And Bernice, he needs to know. Not the version everyone's telling, where you're a noble martyr who saved the boss. The real version, where you were so invisible that poison felt like mercy. Bernice's hands tightened around the teacup. If I tell him that, he'll hate himself. Or worse, he'll treat me like I'm broken, like I'm fragile. I don't want to be his rehabilitation project. Bo-yoon shook her head. You think being his rehabilitation project would be worse than being his invisible household manager for another 6 years? This marriage is already broken, child. The question is whether either of you has the courage to rebuild it from the ground up, or if you're both going to settle for expensive apologies and unchanged behavior. She stood, smoothed her skirt. I'm going to tell Woo-sung that there's something you need to say to him. I'm going to tell him to listen without defending himself, without trying to fix it, without making it about his guilt. I'm going to tell him to hear you. She looked at Bernice directly. And then it's up to you whether you tell him the truth, or give him another lie he can pretend to accept. After Bo-yoon left, Bernice sat alone in the living room. The diamond bracelet was still on her wrist. She'd put it on that morning out of obligation. It caught the afternoon light coming through the windows. Beautiful, expensive, meaningless. She twisted it slowly, thinking about courage, about truth, about whether she had the strength to stop protecting him from the consequences of his neglect. If she was going to survive this marriage, she couldn't keep pretending the poison was only about saving him. She had to tell him she'd been drowning, long before that wine glass ever touched her lips. 3 weeks post-poisoning, 2:17 a.m. Bernice hadn't slept properly since the confession with Bo Yun. She was in the twins' room again. Same chair she'd sat in 100 times before, same nightlight, casting soft shadows across Min Jin's sleeping face. Her daughter's chest rose and fell, steady, peaceful, 4 years old, and completely unaware that her mother had briefly wanted to leave her. Bernice watched, thinking about what it meant to be a mother who'd wanted to escape, thinking about the conversation she'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. Tears streamed silently down her face. She didn't wipe them away, just let them fall. At 1:45 a.m., Wu Sung's phone had buzzed on the nightstand in the guest room, where he'd been sleeping, since Bernice came home from the hospital. His mother's name on the screen. "Your wife is in the twins' room. Go sit with her." "Mother, it's almost 2 in the morning. Don't talk. Don't fix. Just be there." She hung up before he could respond. So he went. Found Bernice exactly where Bo Yun said she'd be. Sitting in the rocking chair beside Min Jin's bed, tears on her face, staring at their daughter, like she was memorizing something she was afraid to forget. Wu Sung didn't announce himself. Didn't ask if she was okay. He was learning that question was useless. He just sat on the floor beside her chair. 5 minutes passed. 10. The only sounds were Min Jin's soft breathing and the occasional sniffle from Bernice. Finally, he said what Bo Yun had coached him to say. "My mother said you need to tell me something, and I'm going to listen." Bernice didn't look at him, kept staring at Min Jin's sleeping face. "Everyone keeps calling me brave, heroic. They say I saved you." She paused, wiped her face with the sleeve of her robe, the old Target one she'd had for years, soft from too many washes. But that's not the whole truth. Wu Sung stayed quiet, hands folded in his lap, waiting. "When I saw that wine glass, I knew it was poisoned. And yes, I thought, I can't let him drink that. I can't let the twins grow up without a father." Her voice was flat, steady, like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed too many times. But there was another thought right behind it, a terrible thought. She finally turned to look at him, tears streaming, eyes red. "I thought if I drink this and die, at least it will be over. At least I'll finally matter to you. At least you'll remember me as someone who loved you, instead of someone who just managed your house and raised your children and made sure your mother didn't hate you for modernizing the business." Wu Sung's face went slack. She watched the shock register, watched him try to process what she was saying. "Do you understand what I'm saying? I didn't just risk my life to save yours. I used your life as an excuse to escape mine." The words hung in the air. Min Jin shifted in her sleep, rolled over, clutched her stuffed bunny tighter. Bernice looked back at her daughter. "I have 2 beautiful children sleeping in this room right now, children I love more than anything, and part of me wanted to leave them." Her voice broke. "Not because they're not enough, because I was so tired of being invisible that death felt like relief." She was sobbing now, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and uncontainable. "I was so empty that poison felt like mercy. That's how invisible I became, not just to you, but to myself." Wu Sung had made decisions that ended lives, survived attempts on his own life with cold calculation. But this, his wife telling him she'd wanted to die because he made her feel worthless, broke something in him that couldn't be fixed with strategy or money. His hands shook, his voice cracked when he tried to speak. "Bernice, don't apologize." She cut him off, sharp, final. "Don't tell me you'll change. Don't make promises. I need you to understand what you did to me." Silence. Wu Sung sat beside her chair, and for the first time in their 6-year marriage, he had no response. No plan. No way to fix this with power or wealth or influence. He could only sit with the crushing weight of what he'd done. Minutes passed. Neither spoke. Min Jin's breathing, the hum of the nightlight, the distant sound of a car passing outside. The moment stretched into something unbearable. Finally, quietly, his voice raw. "I didn't just fail to see you. I made you want to disappear." It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. Bernice looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since the poisoning. Yes. One word, but it landed like a verdict. More silence. Then Woo Sung spoke again, barely above a whisper. I don't know how to fix this. Here's where Bernice could have offered false hope. Could have made it easier. Could have told him it was okay, that they'd figure it out, that love was enough. But she didn't. I don't know if you can. She wiped her face, steadied her breathing. But if you want to try, really try, not just throw money at it, you have to start by being here. Not bringing me things, not making grand gestures, just being present. Learning who I actually am, not who you need me to be. Woo Sung nodded, listening. I'm not asking you to love me differently, Bernice continued. I'm asking you to see me at all, to notice when I'm in the room, to ask how I'm doing, and actually wait for an answer. She gestured toward Min Jin's bed, Yoongjin's across the room, to sit with our children when they have nightmares, instead of scheduling time with them like business appointments on your Google Calendar. I'm asking you to act like we're a family, instead of a corporation. Woo Sung sat with that, let it settle. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep, didn't offer empty reassurances, just said, quietly, tomorrow morning I'm going to make breakfast. I'm probably going to burn it. The twins are probably going to think it's weird. You're probably going to want to take over. He looked at her. But I'm asking you to let me try. Not because I know what I'm doing. Because I need to start somewhere. Bernice didn't smile. Didn't offer encouragement or praise. Just said, okay. And in that moment, it wasn't the beginning of healing. It was just the end of pretending everything was fine. 6:30 a.m., the next morning. Woo Sung stood in the kitchen, staring at a carton of eggs like they were a puzzle he needed to solve. He'd never scrambled eggs. The carton sat on the granite counter. 12 eggs, organic, free range, the kind Bernice always bought from Whole Foods. He opened it, stared at them. How many eggs did 4-year-olds eat? The twins appeared in the doorway. Pajamas, messy hair, confused expressions. Where's Mommy? Min Jin asked. Mommy's resting. I'm making breakfast. Youngjin tilted his head, studying his father with the brutal honesty only a 4-year-old can deliver. You don't cook, Daddy. I'm learning. From the doorway, still in her robe, the old soft one from Target, Bernice watched. Every instinct screamed at her to take over. The eggs were burning. He'd used the wrong pan, cast iron instead of non-stick. He hadn't added butter first. The twins were getting restless, climbing onto the kitchen stools, swinging their legs impatiently. But this is what she'd asked for, him trying, even badly. So she stayed quiet, arms crossed, watching her husband discover that parenting at 6:30 a.m. was harder than running a crime syndicate. The eggs turned out blackened, crispy around the edges, rubbery in the middle. The toast was cold because he'd made it first and then started the eggs. Min Jin took one look at her plate and started crying. What's wrong? Woo Sung asked, genuinely confused. My juice is in the wrong cup. He looked at the cup. Blue, plastic. From the cabinet where all the other cups were. What's wrong with this cup? Min Jin cried harder. Woo Sung looked at Bernice, desperate, lost. Help? She almost did. Almost walked over, found the pink cup with the bunny on it, poured the juice, fixed everything the way she'd fixed everything for 6 years, then stopped herself. What does Min Jin usually have for breakfast? He blinked. I don't know. Then ask her. He turned back to their daughter, 4 years old, tears streaming down her face over a cup. Min Jin, what do you want? Through sobs, the pink cup, with the bunny. Woo Sung opened the cabinet, searched, found it behind 3 other cups, poured juice carefully, handed it to her. She stopped crying, took the cup, drank. He looked at Bernice like he'd just discovered gravity. She almost smiled. Youngjin, meanwhile, had decided to take charge. You have to cut the toast diagonal, Daddy. Triangles taste better. Woo Sung, a man who'd built an empire on intimidation and strategic violence, looked at his 4-year-old son with complete seriousness. Triangles taste better? Science. Min Jin, recovered from her cup crisis, added her expertise. And you have to make the eggs fluffy, not flat. You made them flat. The twins were bossy, confident, delighted by this role reversal where Daddy didn't know things and they did. Woo Sung took orders from 4-year-olds and looked more uncertain than Bernice had ever seen him. At 7:15 a.m., Bo Yoon arrived. She had her own key, used it, walked into chaos. Flour on the floor, Woo-sung had attempted pancakes as a backup plan, and failed. Bernice still watching from the doorway. Woo-sung covered in egg, and what looked like maple syrup. The twins eating burned toast cut into careful triangles. What happened here? Woo-sung looked up. Flour in his hair. I'm learning to make breakfast. Bo-yun looked at Bernice. Bernice gave the smallest nod. He's trying. The matriarch set down her purse. Good. You're 30 years late, but good. This became the new pattern. Woo-sung woke at 6 a.m. instead of 8. Handled the twins' morning routine. Badly at first. Clumsily always. Bernice coached when asked. Stayed silent when not. He learned that Min-jin needed her stuffed bunny, or she wouldn't nap. That you had to present the bunny to her, not just leave it in the crib. He learned that Young-jin needed 5-minute warnings before transitions, or he'd melt down completely. 5 minutes until we leave for school, buddy. Then 2 minutes. Then time to go. He learned that reading the same book 4 nights in a row, Goodnight Moon, currently wasn't boring to them. It was comforting, predictable, safe. These were things Bernice had known for years. To him, they were revelations. Week 1. He asked her how she slept. Actually waited for the answer instead of scrolling through his phone. Fine. Min-jin woke up once, but I got her back down. Why didn't you wake me? You were asleep. Next time, wake me. Week 2. He noticed she was wearing a dress he'd never seen. Is that new? She looked down. Navy blue, from Nordstrom rack, 3 years old. No, I've had it for a while. It looks nice. Such a small thing. But Bernice felt it settle somewhere unexpected. Week 3. He found her crying in the laundry room at midnight. Didn't ask why. Didn't try to fix it. Just sat on the floor beside the dryer while it hummed through a cycle. After 10 minutes, she told him. Min-jin had a nightmare. About monsters. I couldn't comfort her. She kept crying for you. And you weren't there. And I couldn't make it better alone. And that felt like failing. He was quiet. Then, tomorrow night, I'll handle it. You don't know how. Then teach me. A month after the confession, 2:15 a.m. Min-jin screamed from a nightmare. Bernice started to get up, old instinct. Muscle memory from 4 years of being the only one who responded. Woo-sung's hand on her shoulder. I've got it. She lay back down, skeptical, listening. Heard him pad down the hall to the twins' room. Heard his low voice, gentle in a way she'd never heard it before. It's okay, Min-jin. Daddy's here. You're safe. Heard Min-jin sobbing slow. Hiccup. Soften. Heard him reading. The bunny book she always demanded after bad dreams. His voice steady, patient, reading words he'd probably memorized by now. Heard silence. 10 minutes later, he came back to bed. Slipped under the covers carefully, trying not to wake her even though she was already awake. Whispered in the dark. She's asleep. And Bernice realized something that shifted the ground beneath her. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to prove something or earn forgiveness. He was parenting. They didn't fall back in love. They weren't suddenly passionate or romantic. Most nights, they slept in the same bed like polite strangers who'd agreed to share space. But he was there, present, learning, making mistakes, plenty of them, and trying again. Asking questions instead of assuming he knew better. And Bernice felt something she hasn't felt in 6 years. The faint possibility that she might not be invisible forever. If your partner suddenly started trying to change, really trying, but doing it badly and slowly, would you have the patience to let them learn? Drop a comment, because what comes next tests whether this change is real, or if old patterns will return the moment pressure does. While Woo-sung learned to make breakfast, and Bernice learned to trust again, there was someone they hadn't forgotten. Seo-yun. The poisoner. He sat in a safe house on the outskirts of Atlanta, not police custody, family custody. Because in the Tan organization, betrayal was handled internally. The house was sparse, 2 bedrooms, IKEA furniture that had been assembled quickly and without care. Guards rotated shifts outside. Seo-yun wasn't allowed to leave. Wasn't allowed phone calls except to his wife Sun-hee, monitored and brief. 4 weeks he'd been sitting there. 4 weeks of waiting for judgment. 4 weeks of replaying the moment Bernice drank that wine and collapsed. The moment his desperate gamble turned into something unforgivable. On a Thursday afternoon, Bo Yoon arrived. Alone. No guards. No entourage. Just the matriarch in her burgundy coat, carrying her vintage handbag, walking into that safe house like she owned it, which, in a way, she did. Seo Yoon stood when she entered. Instinct, respect, fear. She sat across from him at the small kitchen table, gestured for him to sit. He did. She didn't speak immediately, just studied him, with the same calculating stillness she'd used to survive 5 decades in this world. Finally, tell me why. Not an order, an invitation. Seo Yoon had expected rage, violence, traditional mafia retribution. Instead, she was giving him space to explain. And because he'd been drowning in guilt for 4 weeks, because Bernice had survived but his conscience hadn't, he told the truth. They threatened my family. His voice cracked on the word family. Sun-hee, Jin-ho, they sent pictures. At the park, at daycare, at our house. They knew Jin-ho's nap schedule, knew what time Sun-hee picked him up, knew everything. He pulled out his phone, showed Bo Yoon the messages he'd saved even though he should have deleted them. Photos of his wife pushing their infant son on a swing, time-stamped, captioned with addresses and schedules. They gave me 10 days. Eliminate your brother or watch your family die slowly. That's what they said. Slowly. Bo Yoon looked at the photos. Her expression didn't change. The loan sharks wanted the shipping routes, Seo Yoon continued. The pharmaceutical imports Woo Sung was about to secure. They calculated that if there was a leadership transition during the chaos, they could renegotiate terms, get access, make millions. He set down the phone. I was just the weapon. Silence. Then Seo Yoon said the part that had been eating him alive. I knew Bernice spotted the discrepancies. The financial irregularities, my gambling debts. I knew she tried to warn Woo Sung twice. His voice broke. I gambled that if she tried to intervene at the dinner, she'd be dismissed again. That's how invisible she was. I weaponized it. I turned her invisibility into my opportunity. He looked at Bo Yoon with raw anguish. I never imagined she'd drink it herself. The only person in this family who ever treated me with genuine kindness, and I almost killed her. Bo Yoon was quiet for a long moment. Then, you were trapped between 2 impossible choices. You chose wrong, but I understand why. Seo Yoon blinked. That wasn't what he'd expected. The loan sharks didn't just threaten you randomly, she continued. They studied this family. They identified the weakest link, not you, but the relationship between you and your brother. They knew Woo Sung wouldn't see you as a threat until it was too late. She paused. They were right. Do you know why they were right? Seo Yoon shook his head. Because my son built an empire, but forgot to build a family. He trusted you to execute orders, but never asked what you needed. He relied on Bernice to hold everything together, but never saw the weight she carried. Bo Yoon's voice was steady, clinical, truthful. He became so focused on external threats that he couldn't see the internal fractures. You were desperate. Bernice was invisible. Both vulnerabilities he created through neglect. Outside the door, Woo Sung stood listening. He'd come to deliver his own judgment, his own rage. Instead, he was hearing his mother explain how his leadership style had created the conditions for betrayal. How this wasn't just Seo Yoon's failure. It was his. He opened the door. Seo Yoon stood immediately, braced for violence. But Woo Sung's voice was calm, controlled. The loan sharks have been handled. Sun-hee and Jin-ho are safe. The debt is erased. Seo Yoon stared, shocked. Why? Because Bernice asked me to protect them. Woo Sung sat down at the table, across from his brother. She said your family shouldn't pay for a choice you made under duress. She said forgiveness doesn't mean trust, but it means refusing to become as ruthless as the people threatening us. He leaned back, looked at Seo Yoon directly. You can't stay in the organization. That's not negotiable. But you can leave alive, with your family intact. Seo Yoon's hands shook. I'm setting you up in Seattle. Legitimate business. Import consulting. Nothing criminal. You'll work for your money, like normal people do. Starbucks on your commute. PTA meetings. Soccer practice. Woo Sung's voice was steady. And if you ever come back to Atlanta, if you ever contact anyone in this organization again, that mercy ends. Seo Yoon was crying now. I don't deserve this. No, Woo-sung said. But my wife does. She saved my life, and she's teaching me that power without compassion is just cruelty with better organization. 3 days later, So-yoon left Atlanta. Woo-sung stood in the driveway of that safe house, watching his brother load a U-Haul with the few belongings he'd been allowed to keep. Sun-hee sat in the passenger seat of their Honda, Jin-ho in the car seat behind her. She didn't look at Woo-sung, didn't wave, just stared straight ahead, holding the address of their new apartment in Seattle like a lifeline. The traditional move would have been execution. Woo-sung knew that. His father would have considered mercy weakness. The advisors would have called it poor leadership. But Bernice's words echoed. You can choose to be different. You can choose to break cycles instead of perpetuating them. And for the first time in his leadership, maybe the first time in his life, he chose the harder, kinder path. Not because it was strategic, because she'd asked him to. 2 months after the poisoning, life had found a new rhythm. Not perfect, not healed, but different. Woo-sung still ran the organization. The shipping deal had closed successfully. Territory was secure. Money flowed. The empire functioned exactly as it had before. But now he was home for dinner 4 nights a week. Now he knew that Min-jin preferred the very hungry caterpillar at bedtime, and Young-jin wanted Goodnight Moon read twice, not once. Now he asked Bernice how her day was, and actually listened to answers that weren't about logistics or schedules. The small moments rebuilt trust in ways diamonds never could. He brought her coffee in the morning, not Starbucks from his assistant, coffee he made himself in their Keurig. With the hazelnut creamer she liked, the kind he'd had to search for in the pantry because he'd never noticed it before. Not because he was trying to earn points, because he noticed she looked tired. She let him handle the twins' bath time even though he got water everywhere. On the floor. On himself. Somehow on the ceiling once, though neither of them understood how. They sat together after the kids were asleep and just talked. About nothing important. The 18 inches of distance at the dinner table slowly closed. One morning, Min-jin asked a question while Bernice was packing her lunch. Mommy, why is Daddy here more? Bernice paused. Held a Ziploc bag of apple slices. How do you explain attempted murder and redemption to a 4-year-old? Daddy realized he was missing important things. So now he's making time for them. Min-jin considered this with the serious logic only children possess. Did he realize we're important? Bernice's throat tightened. Yes, baby, he realized. Bo-yoon watched all of it with quiet satisfaction. She didn't praise the progress, didn't congratulate them, just observed. One evening, the twins were asleep upstairs. Woo-sung and Bernice stood at the sink doing dishes together, a sight the matriarch never thought she'd witness. He washed, she dried, moving in a rhythm that was still new but becoming familiar. Bo-yoon stood in the doorway. You're learning, both of you. That's all I wanted. Then she left, before either could respond to the closest thing to approval she'd ever given. 3 months post-poisoning, Woo-sung attempted to braid Min-jin's hair for school pictures. It was a disaster. Lumpy, crooked, held together with approximately 17 hair clips when it should have needed 3. Min-jin looked in the bathroom mirror, tilted her head, studied her reflection with diplomatic care. It's creative. Young-jin, passing by, was less diplomatic. You made her look like a pineapple. Woo-sung looked at Bernice, defeated, and she laughed. Actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle or forced smile. Real laughter that came from somewhere genuine. He joined in. The twins joined in. And for 5 minutes, they were just a family who thought pineapple hair was funny. That night, after Bernice had redone Min-jin's hair properly, a simple French braid that took 2 minutes, after getting the twins to bed, she and Woo-sung sat on the back porch. Tea in mismatched mugs, the kind you accumulate over years without noticing. Silent for a while. Comfortable silence, not the heavy kind. Then he asked, How are you doing? Really doing? She considered the question. Actually considered it instead of giving the automatic response. Some days I'm angry. Some days I'm scared this won't last. Some days I look at you and still see the man who made me invisible. She paused, watched steam rise from her tea. But today, I saw you trying to braid our daughter's hair with a YouTube tutorial pulled up on your phone. And I thought, maybe you're learning to see me by learning to see them. His response was honest, not performative. I'm terrified that I'll slip back, that I'll get busy and start treating you like staff again, that I'll fail and you'll finally leave. I'm terrified too, Bernice said. That I'll settle for less than I deserve because it's easier than demanding more. That I'll forget I almost wanted to die and go back to just surviving. They looked at each other. So what do we do? He asked. We stay scared. Fear keeps us honest. Later that night, they were close again for the first time since the poisoning. Not wild passion. Not cinematic romance. Gentle, tentative, learning each other again. Afterward, lying in the dark, Bernice spoke quietly. I don't forgive you yet, but I'm starting to believe you're trying. Wu Sung's voice was equally quiet. That's enough. For now, that's enough. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows. Wu Sung making breakfast. Still badly, but confidently. Pancakes shaped vaguely like animals. Or pineapples. Hard to tell. The twins eating them anyway, drowning everything in syrup. Bernice drinking coffee he'd made to her taste this time. The right amount of creamer, the right temperature. Bo Yoon arriving with fresh fruit from the Korean grocery store, and minimal criticism. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, imperfect, real. But for the first time in 6 years, Bernice sat at the family table and didn't feel invisible. 6 months after the poisoning, Bernice stood in the twins' room watching them sleep. Same room where she'd confessed to Wu Sung that she'd wanted to escape. Same chair where she'd cried silent tears, while contemplating whether anyone would miss her if she was gone. But tonight, the room felt different. She felt different. The Mafia world hadn't changed. Wu Sung still ran a criminal organization. There were still threats, still dangers, still ethical lines they crossed that kept her up some nights. But the marriage changed. Not because he stopped being a Mafia boss, because he started being a husband. Because he learned, you can't build an empire worth keeping if you dismantle the people holding it together. Last week, a crisis emerged. A rival faction threatening territory, demanding immediate attention. In the old days, Wu Sung would have canceled everything, disappeared for 72 hours, handled it alone. That night, he came home at 6 p.m. Like he'd promised. Bernice saw the stress in his shoulders, the tension in his jaw. You need to deal with this. He shook his head. I need to have dinner with my family. The crisis will wait 2 hours. They've waited 6 years. Bernice could have settled. Could have accepted expensive apologies and unchanged behavior. Could have raised the twins alone, while married, and told herself it was fine. Instead, she'd chosen the harder path, demanding to be seen. And when she was finally seen, she chose to stay. Not because she had no other options, because he proved change was possible. Min Jin and Yong Jin would grow up in a Mafia family. That was unavoidable. But they'd grow up watching their father choose them, watching their mother demand respect, watching their grandmother navigate power with wisdom. They'd learn that love without presence is just a word, that power without compassion is just cruelty. They'd learn these lessons because Bernice almost died, and then chose to live differently. At a family gathering last Sunday, Bo Yoon pulled Bernice aside. I arranged that dinner because I saw you fading. I thought proximity might help. I never imagined it would nearly kill you. Bernice met her eyes. I never imagined it would save me. Bo Yoon studied her face with the same calculating precision she'd used for 5 decades. You're not the woman I met 6 years ago. She would have stayed invisible forever. She almost did. But poison has a way of clarifying what matters. Tonight, another family dinner. Same upscale steakhouse, same mahogany table, same positioning, Bernice on the left, Wu Sung at center, Bo Yoon on the right. But everything was different. Wine poured, red, not green. Wu Sung looked up from his phone. Actually put it down. Looked at Bernice. Are you okay? She smiled. Small, genuine. Yes, I'm here. He reached across the 18 inches that used to be a canyon and took her hand. A public display of affection he would have considered weakness 6 months ago. Now it was just truth. She was no longer invisible. Bernice Tan didn't just survive poison. She survived 6 years of slow erasure. And when she finally had the courage to demand more than survival, she discovered something powerful. The person who makes you invisible can learn to see you if you refuse to disappear. Not because you're a martyr, because you matter. This is a story about the quietest kind of strength. The strength to stay when leaving would be easier. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, and subscribe for more stories about women who refuse to disappear into the roles everyone expects them to play. Drop a comment. Are you team stay or team leave? Because Bernice chose to stay. Not everyone would. Not everyone should. But her choice was hers, made with clear eyes and hard-won power. And that's what makes her dangerous. A wife sat at dinner, poison in her veins, while her husband ignored her dying. 6 months later, she sits at dinner again. Alive, seen, finally understood. The Korean Mafia boss learned something his empire couldn't teach him. The most valuable thing you can protect isn't territory. It's the person who makes home feel like more than just another fortress to defend.